Tonight, the path back to normal. COVID cases falling across the country.
I am cautiously optimistic about watching our cases come down.
And states dropping mask mandates. Plus, trending down.
We've worn out everything we've got in 2 decades of war.
America's declining military strength. And the fight against big tech censorship.
Big tech censors conservatives.
How social media giants, some say, are manipulating the flow of information. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. Face coverings appear to be phasing out in several parts of America. Thanks for joining us for CBN's Faith Nation. In Washington, D.C., I'm John Jessup. Well, COVID cases and hospitalizations are dropping down 53% from their peak almost a month ago on January 15th. Along with them, state and local leaders dropping mask mandates, too. Although that news is leading to frustration and confusion. Add to that the growing belief among health experts that life with COVID is likely here to stay. CBN's Brody Carter joins us now with tonight's top story. Brody.
John, state and local leaders are taking the lead on who should wear masks and where they are required. For schools, some leaders are putting decision-making power in the hands of parents. This back and forth has created almost a dizzying effect for those trying to follow the bouncing ball.
We've always said that these decisions are going to have to be made at the local level.
A dramatic drop in COVID cases and hospitalizations are leading a number of states to loosen certain restrictions.
As we see the storm clouds are parting, as are the COVID clouds parting.
New York, once a leading voice for mandates, dropped indoor mask requirements for businesses while keeping masks in place for schools at least through winter break. California will follow a similar path starting next week.
And let counties, cities, and businesses to make their own decisions on what they want to do.
If the governor says no more masks required, then they're not required. You know, my customers, they come in with them on, that's fine. If they don't, that'll also be fine.
Meanwhile, New Jersey, Connecticut, Delaware, Oregon, and Massachusetts are leading a blue wave, removing school mandates within the next month.
Masking will be an individual choice in schools across the Commonwealth on February 28th.
Some critics say this move back to some form of normalcy undermines CDC safety recommendations.
But at this time, we continue to recommend masking in areas of high and substantial transmission. That's much of the country right now in public indoor settings.
We're also hearing more medical experts planting the seed that instead of seeing an end to COVID, that we'll need to accept living with it in some form.
Where we want to be is that sufficient control, but a level of control that does not disrupt us in society, does not dominate our lives, does not prevent us to do the things that we generally do under normal existence.
All of this as the world passes 400 million COVID cases, just 1 month after reaching 300 million. The numbers reflecting the lasting Omicron variant, which currently accounts for 100% of all cases in the nation. While the U.S. is seeing a drop in cases, Asian countries are experiencing a surge following Lunar New Year celebrations. The World Health Organization hopes Omicron can help make the pandemic manageable. That would be throughout Europe. John, back to you.
All right, CBN's Brody Carter. Well, now to the humanitarian crisis unfolding in Afghanistan since the U.S. withdrawal. As starvation overtakes the country, more than 23 million people in the country are in dire need of assistance, the United Nations reports. Today on Capitol Hill, David Miliband of the International Rescue Committee testified that things are so desperate, girls are being sold into marriage and people are selling their own organs to get money for food.
6 months ago, Afghanistan was a poor country, a very poor country. As Senator Young has rightly pointed out, the climate crisis, the COVID crisis added to that. However, today, Afghanistan is a starving country, not just a poor country. The reason, I'm very sorry to report, the proximate cause of this starvation crisis is the international economic policy which has been adopted since August.
Last month, the United States pledged an additional $308 million in humanitarian aid. During today's hearing, a Republican lawmaker questioned if that money will just end up in the hands of Afghanistan's Taliban leaders. Well, for more now, we turn to Jeremy Barker, Senior Program Officer and Director of the Middle East Action Team at the Religious Freedom Institute. Welcome, Jeremy. 5 months now since that hasty completion of the exit of American forces out of Afghanistan. Jeremy, what's the situation like now on the ground for ordinary Afghans?
Yeah, well, as you heard in the lead up to this, the humanitarian situation in Afghanistan is truly mind-boggling. More than half the country facing humanitarian need. There's estimates that up to 1 million Afghan children could die from starvation. And this is compounded by massive security concerns. We have the Taliban trying to figure out how to govern a country with its own competing factions. And then you have terrorist groups like ISIS that view this as an opportunity for them to gain ground. And so between those governance and those security concerns, this is only magnifying the humanitarian need. And it's a country that's going through its worst drought in nearly 30 years. So the impact for the average Afghan is really massive.
What you're describing is suffering upon suffering. Jeremy, as you well know, this year's Open Doors World Watch List rated Afghanistan as the worst place to be a Christian, knocking off North Korea, which had held that #1 slot for decades. Jeremy, for context, can you help set the stage? Can you give us a sense of how many Christians, Afghan Christians there are, and what dangers do they face under Taliban rule?
Yeah, so prior to the U.S. withdrawal, we had seen the Afghan church growing. There's variations of those numbers, but tens of thousands of Afghan Christians. Many of them have now been forced to flee the country, but others that have gone underground some that had the opportunity to leave and were committed to staying and being a part of their country. And yet we know that there's Christians who are being actively hunted down and targeted. We know those who've been arrested if Christian material have been found in their homes or on electronic devices. Some cases even turned over by their family. As you mentioned, the situation for women is particularly concerning for all women, and especially those from religious minorities, Christian converts in particular. So you have this tension of active hunting, and yet Afghan Christians who have a compelling desire to stay there and to love their neighbors, even at great risk to themselves.
Jeremy, we only have a few seconds left. For anyone who's watching and wanting to do something, can you recommend how they can help?
Yeah, so remain engaged in prayer. Pray for your brothers and sisters, and work, give, donate. The needs are massive. And so for organizations that are working there on the ground, if you don't know them, you can reach us at the Religious Freedom Institute. We can put you in contact with vetted organizations that are working actively in the country. But don't look away. The needs for our brothers and sisters, for all Afghans, are massive. And this is a moment for the church to step up and to show the love of Christ to those in need.
Sobering and important reminders there. Jeremy Barker with the Religious Freedom Institute, thank you so much for your time and the work that you all do.
Thanks for having us on.
Well, top Russian military commanders have made their way to Belarus for a massive military joint exercise. According to the Kremlin, it's the largest such drill ever held. But military experts worry it could provide cover for a multi-pronged invasion into Ukraine when the Olympic Games wrap up on February 20th. Even so, the White House says it is not planning a mass evacuation of U.S. citizens.
What we're encouraging American citizens to do is depart now. Obviously, there hasn't been an invasion, and we don't know that there has been a decision to invade. Obviously, we have a range of diplomatic presences, not only in Ukraine, but in neighboring countries that are always available for a U.S. citizen should they need assistance.
Pope Francis today encouraged continued diplomatic talks, saying war between Russia and Ukraine would be madness. Well, as America faces threats on multiple fronts, Congress has yet to pass a federal budget which directly impacts the military. For now, it is forced to operate at last year's funding levels until an official budget is passed, putting on hold everything from building new ships to developing hypersonic weapons. defense experts warn that America's military strength is trending in the wrong direction. And as CBN national security correspondent Caitlin Burke reports, it's also a trend of which our allies and adversaries alike have taken note.
Each year, defense experts at the Heritage Foundation take a deep assessment of the various branches of the U.S. military. The result? A highly regarded report card known as the Index of U.S. Military Strength.
It's a way for us to convey to the American public, to taxpayers, basically what they're getting for their money and whether or not the military is well postured to defend the country against threats and to defend U.S. interests around the world.
To sum up this year's findings, things aren't trending in the right direction.
Unfortunately, here in this latest edition, the 2022, we're starting to see declines again in readiness, certainly sacrificing of end strength or the size of the forces to pay for these things. And these budgets, a national budget that's in a continuing resolution, it really makes it hard to sustain the programs needed to keep people trained, keep current equipment ready, and replace old equipment as it's leaving service.
In the grading, the Army comes in at marginal, seen as aging faster than it is modernizing. A similar rating for the Navy, although it's trending to weak, due to the combination of a desperate need for a bigger fleet and lack of funding to make that happen. The Marine Corps scores highest at strong, and the Air Force and New Space Force are at the bottom with weak ratings. As for U.S. nuclear capability, it's on the higher end with a warning, strong trending to marginal. Defense expert Dakota Wood, editor of the index, says these scores also take into account the Biden administration's current priorities.
There's been a lot more talk and policy guidance out of the White House on combating climate change and global warming, gender and racial equity, diversity, equity, inclusion is kind of the term of art from the administration, those sorts of things. And there is about making sure that the military is actually combat ready.
We've worn out everything we've got in 2 decades of war in the Middle East. And we've got to start not just rebuilding, but we've got to start modernizing to get those cyber and artificial intelligence capabilities to fight these wars of the future. They're going to look so different from what we've done in the past.
Key adversaries, meanwhile, are investing in defense at a breakneck pace. Their current perception of the U.S. doing nothing to slow them down.
Using the withdrawal from Afghanistan as an example, the perception is the United States is incompetent. They rushed to do things in kind of a backwards sort of way, removing your military forces before removing your own citizens. And so this bungling had Beijing and Moscow and Tehran and Pyongyang thinking maybe the United States has really lost a step here.
American allies seem to feel the same.
Israeli leaders, Arab leaders that I talk to, everybody in the region, and you see it all over the world, they don't believe that Biden has the strength. Set aside his physical condition, which is an open question. They don't think he has the strength of will, of character perhaps, of resolve to take on Putin and the Chinese and the Iranians.
Joel Rosenberg, editor-in-chief of All Israel News, tells CBN the Middle East is watching and worried.
What I think everybody in this region is worrying about is what if Putin and, President Xi in Beijing and the supreme leader of Iran decide no one's going to stop us. Let's go get what we want. That's the big X factor in 2022.
With resources spread out across the globe, Wood says our military is stretched too thin to respond to multiple conflicts at once. He believes the key to turning things around is funding.
Any reasonable person would say the current budget of $740 billion is a lot of money, and it absolutely is. But when the increase in the budget from this year compared to last is 1.8%, and we saw an annual inflation rate of 7%, you're not even keeping pace with the cost of buying stuff like it's fuel or medical supplies.
Representative Mike Rogers, the ranking member of the House Armed Services Committee, says defense spending needs to be increased to a minimum of 3% over the rate of inflation for the foreseeable future.
This is going to be like a decade-long process that we're going to have to keep making these investments to get these capabilities that we're going to need to keep ourselves free and safe. Because I tell people all the time, it doesn't matter if your social security system's solvent if you're dead, and there's people in this world that want to kill us.
One investment Rogers is urging the president to pursue: nuclear modernization efforts. Biden has a review on this area expected later this month, and there's concern he'll make cuts rather than improvements, a move Rogers fears will invite further aggression from our enemies. Caitlin Burke, CBN News.
All right, thank you, Caitlin. Coming up, fighting over freedom of speech, why some conservatives are taking aim at big tech. We'll be right back. Welcome back. For years now, Senator Ted Cruz has been sounding the alarm, claiming big tech censorship is the single greatest threat to democracy, and he's not the only one. Many Republican lawmakers say companies like Facebook and Twitter censor conservative voices. And according to a new report from the Heritage Foundation, it's just one of many issues with big tech companies. The group's president, Kevin Roberts, writes, every single American should be concerned by big tech's manipulation of the free market to exploit consumers, censor conservatives, target children, expand chilling surveillance programs, and selectively limit access to the modern public square. Well, for more now, we turn to Kara Frederick. She is the author of the new report from the Heritage Foundation called Combating Big Tech's Totalitarianism, a Roadmap. Kara, welcome. You say corporations do not have the right to undermine the basic values and rights that make our republic the beacon of freedom. Many Americans may not realize there's an issue, and of course, on the other side, you'll have people who say you're making much ado about nothing. So, Kara, to make sure everyone understands what we're talking about and we're on the same page, can you lay out what you mean when you say big tech is undermining rights?
Absolutely. And, you know, for people with their heads in the sand, I just tell them, believe your lying eyes. Look at there's a litany of censorship instances that are not just anecdotal. We can actually put studies and data to this confluence of evidence right now. The Media Research Center in particular, they said that big tech companies censor conservatives, Republican members of Congress, at a rate of 53-1 compared to Democratic members of Congress. You've probably had, if you look at mainstream conservative content, you've probably seen that Representative Banks for saying a man is a man and a woman is a woman. He was suspended from Twitter. Ali Bestucky, a Christian commentator, she was suspended from Twitter for saying the same thing. We had one of our very own heritage scholars, Mike Gonzalez. He was not allowed to promote his ads for his book on Amazon because the book compared BLM to Marxism. And, you know, we see many of these data points. We see now these studies with the Media Research Center coming out. There was a Columbia researcher in 2019 who found that there was a ratio of 21-1 suspensions of Trump supporters compared to the one Hillary Clinton supporter that was suspended in his data set since the inception of Twitter. So we can definitively say that this is systematic, that this is happening, and then color it with your own experience. And what's more, tech companies are on the offensive against a lot of this content. They are labeling regular mainstream conservatives as potential extremists. Facebook had a pilot program this past summer in July that was rolled out. And if you engage with certain Fox News content or were sharing some very conservative media outlet content, then you got a warning that said you may have engaged with extremism. So this is pervasive, this is inordinate, and it is sustained. And that's what our report lays out in great detail in the even just the beginning of the report.
Those ratios are pretty stark, 53-1, 20-something to 1. You know, you lay out a roadmap in your report to combat what you say is happening. But what are some of the big steps you say should be taken?
Yeah, so again, our conclusions are that conservative censorship, because it's sustained, pervasive, and inordinate, and the effects are political and cultural in nature, this is a singular issue in 2022. So it requires drastic action. And what these reforms would look like, this is a conservative approach to big tech censorship. We want to take a hard look at those business models, those ad tech models that really are at the heart of what lies at these companies and how they're able to manipulate, exploit, and take advantage of Americans and their data. We want to hold CEOs accountable for this. We want to reform Section 230 so that it hews more to the moral standard of the First Amendment. We want to ensure that big tech companies are not working hand in glove with the federal government. We've seen so many instances of that when it comes to Jen Psaki asking these big tech platforms and other tech platforms to police speech. So they should not be able to work with the government to be used as agents to chill speech. They shouldn't be allowed to work with the Chinese Communist Party and those governments as well. So many steps. We've got a whole agenda here. Take a look.
We only have 30 seconds left, and I really want to fit this in. What's the message for Americans? Do you suggest avoid big tech, stay away from social media, or is it to be cautious or find other platforms? And we only have about 15 seconds.
Yep, as others have said, we have to fight for our right to be on these platforms, but we also have to build anew. So tech founders, they got to build at all levels of the technical stack, cloud hosting services, infrastructure, create redundancy, stay on these platforms, but get on others as well, because you never know when one day is your last.
All right, Kara Frederick with the Heritage Foundation, thank you so much for your time and your insights.
Thank you.
Well, from Capitol Hill to Wall Street, a change could be coming for how lawmakers play the market. Next on Faith Nation. Welcome back. A reversal for House Speaker Nancy Pelosi now backing a ban on stock trading for members of Congress. Punchbowl News reports she's directing her caucus to draft a bill that would prevent lawmakers and their senior staff from buying and selling individual stocks, with the goal of voting on the bill by year's end. In the Senate, two pieces of legislation on a trading ban have already been introduced. Republican Josh Hawley of Missouri and Democrat John Ossoff of Georgia released bills that would stop lawmakers and their families from buying or selling stocks while in office. Coming up, what do a zoo in India and the upcoming Super Bowl have in common? We'll tell you right after this. Well, finally tonight, if you're a diehard Bengals fan, you'll probably enjoy this next story. And even if you're not, you'll want to stick around for some guaranteed cuteness. A zoo in northeast India just welcomed 2 royal Bengal tiger cubs into the world. The newest cubs have yet to be named. Zookeepers say the mother and her babies are doing well. This isn't the first time Mom Kazi made news with new cubs. Back in 2020, she gave birth to babies Sultan and Suresh. Some Cincinnati Bengals fans might see the timing of that story as providential with the upcoming game this weekend. The matchup between the Bengals and LA Rams for the Super Bowl 56 is this Sunday, and those were some cute cubs. Thanks so much for watching Faith Nation. We hope to see you right back here again tomorrow.